Negative, Major Tom. Negative. It is imperative that you remain in the capsule. Oh boy, there you go.
It is the distant future, the year 2000.
Houston, we have a podcast. So, I think I'm pretty happy with where the show is going overall, but I think maybe to broaden our reach with certain demographics, we need to kind of pivot a little bit.
How do you mean?
I think we need to pivot to becoming the most red-pilled manosphere book podcast on the internet. I think that's what we need to be doing.
I'm sorry, I don't follow.
Like, we need to be like, "What's up, alphas? It's your book bros," something like that. Like, "What's up, soldiers?"
Oh man, I'm here to tell you about this book I read about crushing puss.
All right, bros, what's up? We're reading 29 Tips of Leadership by the Navy SEALs, followed by Donald Trump Jr.'s autobiography. Something like, gotta appeal to a certain, I think there's a lot of normal books. Now if we just can appeal to people who just pretend they read, they could just, they can't fact check us. They won't know that we're making it all up.
Welcome to the Chad and Brad Book Club. I'm Brad.
And I'm Chad. What's up, Brolgers?
Fighting the good fight, crushing the good puss. Here we go.
And chugging lots of brews, bro.
Aw, yeah. Anyways, welcome to the Sad Boys Book Club. My name's Dusty.
And I'm Daniel.
And this is Leviathan Wakes Part 4. And
Wow.
I feel like I'm saying this damn near every week. If I'm not saying it, I'm thinking it. This has been my favorite section of the book so far.
Really?
Yes.
I mean, that's not to say I disliked it, but I think, to me, like, the Part 3 is still probably my favorite so far.
I think that I don't know. I'm very much a sucker for heavy character moments, and there were plenty in this part, to be sure, and there were some really big plot movements that happened, and great action, and I just I say this every week. You have the most contextually useless superpower, but I find great appreciation in it, in that you always know exactly where to stop. And the end of chapter 43 was such a great spot to cliffhanger on in between parts here. And all I'm thinking about right now is, when can I sit back down and continue reading this book again? Because one, we're getting near the end, and two, it's so damn good that I just want to keep reading it. And when I'm not reading it and I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking, why am I not reading it right now?
That I really was very interested, there at the end. I was very tempted to keep going, but I was like, no. We said this was where we were going to end. I think this is probably the most balanced section that we've read, between character development and like the sort of plotty, actiony kind of stuff. I think this is probably there's quite a bit of both here. But like part 2 was basically all character. Part 3 was almost all action. And I think they kind of strike a balance here.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I'm gonna jump to near the end of this entire section with the attack on Thoth. Thoth?
That's how I was pronouncing it.
Thoth Station. It did a great job of. I thought it was a good action scene. It did not feel like a almost kind of bullet point this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened kind of thing. It felt like the action was flowing, albeit very chaotically. And I do like the stark contrast between the space battle with Holden and the Rossi crew, and Miller with the ground crew, and how they balanced that was really, really well done. And I loved the pacing of the action, and I felt like it wasn't too descriptive, too in your face, too like just like I said, basically a list of this happened and then this happened. But then it's also concise enough to where it's not feeling very sluggish, and I don't feel like I'm just kind of watching a boring action scene in a Michael Bay movie, you know?
Yeah, I think they do a good job, the writers, of creating like this sense of like you know what's going on, but it's not like some books they get a little too nerdy with it. Like he turned his pistol at a 45-degree angle and then surveyed the next 3 hallways one after the they get like a little too granular with it. I think the intent in those cases is to really contextualize and communicate the action, and then there's some that kind of do a poor job. You're reading it and it's just like, okay, wait, how did we get from there to here? I've read a lot of sci-fi, and over the years, a lot of it Star Wars, not necessarily just novelizations, but like within the like extended universe materials. And they a lot of them can kind of suffer in both of those directions, where they like either over or under describe. But I think that here they're really hitting a sweet spot where you're walking through, and it's a lot more. I guess it's more legible, like what's going on. Like you can very clearly understand what's going in your mind. It's not information overload, and it's not just I don't know what to call it. Just gruel.
It's just the Goldilocks of sci-fi action.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to put it.
I also feel like I got some crazy emotional whiplash from this section, to where I had some of my highest highs in my feelings towards the characters and the character moments, and then immediately afterwards suffered some of the lowest lows so far with the character moments, to where I went from being so happy. I texted my friend Mark, who has read all of these books and is a big fan, and I'll read the text. I'll read the text that I sent, because it's I sent this in the moment, and I said Miller preparing to leave the Rossi for the assault on Thoth, thinking about needing to figure out where to go next, and then Holden acknowledging him as the member of the crew gave me the biggest smile.
That's like pictures taken before disaster. Top 10 pictures taken before disaster.
Yeah, and then like 30-40 minutes later, when after he responded, and I responded back to him and said, "Yeah, too bad it's ruined as of now because Dresden." And
yeah,
now we're just where we're at now, still with the two of them, with Holden and Miller. Is it's this. It sucks. I hate it. I just want them to kiss and make up.
I mean, I think he's a little too into Naomi to kiss and make up with Miller. But your point is well taken. I don't know. I was very happy to see that they had seemingly come to some sort of understanding. But then again, we're back with them kind of being on the outs a little bit.
I don't feel like it was an understanding. I'm assuming you're referring to when Miller came to Holden's apartment.
No, before that. I was saying like when they were about to leave to go on the assault.
Yeah, I gotcha.
It seemed like they were kind of like, okay. Well, there was kind of like a rough patch, but they're it seems like they've kind of come to an understanding, and they're going to move forward, together. But that does not seem to be the case at this point.
Yeah, and I definitely felt the same way that Holden felt after Miller came to his apartment and they had their talk and then he left. That it felt so hollow to me. I'm sitting there just like, man, you guys are just tiptoeing around actually talking to each other, and you're just giving out excuses to each other about, oh, I did this because of this, oh, well, you do this because of that, and I just wanted them to just sit down and just talk to each other. And Holden says himself that if like something about it felt incomplete. And I'm like, it does feel incomplete. Just fucking talk to each other instead of trying to make excuses for each other. Like, please, I want you guys to be friends, to work together, to be crewmates, to go on adventures together, and I want to be along for the ride because I love it, and it's just not happening right now. And God, it's just such good storytelling. I love it.
Yeah, it's really good. I'm really hoping that they can. I don't know. I guess we'll see how the book ends. But I'm really hoping that they can finally, I guess, kind of reconcile their worldviews, because what we're seeing is sort of this tension due to Holden kind of being the avatar of a very like idealistic sort of worldview, and then you have Miller, who's sort of this avatar of a very
Holistic?
very jaded. Yeah, what?
Holistic?
I guess holistic to a certain extent, but I was gonna. I don't know. There is a certain realism in a lot of the things that he says and does and believes, but I don't want to necessarily do, at least in this abstract comparison, like a value judgment. I think there's aspects of either character that I, in various moments, will identify with more, but I think that he definitely has a more cynical worldview. I think is safe to say.
Which I guess to round this back into dancing around the topic and getting into it. So where we left them off, they had just escaped Aero Station, right? And they had just barely survived making it back to the ship after getting blasted with a shit ton of radiation.
Yeah. They had already woken up in the med bay when we last left off.
Okay, so the plan at that point, they had gotten the asteroid that Julie had left as where to go back and find the ship that assumedly had destroyed the Canterbury, or at the very least the ship that attacked the Scopuli. I don't know if it's two different ships or if it's the same ship. I think it's the same one, but I could be wrong.
I think it's implied that it's the same.
So they're heading to that ship, and Holden and Miller are still recovering. And when they find it, it's completely deserted. It's tethered to this asteroid rock, and they go in to go try and figure out what happened. There's been signs of a struggle, and they go down to, is it engineering?
Yeah.
And they find a scene not too dissimilar to what Julie found in the prologue, with the fleshy masses and all this other stuff, but it's now been affected by the vacuum of space since there's been the ship has been vacuumed essentially. So then they split up. Amos is trying to get the ship back online. Naomi is searching for, was it the comms? Going through the comms or something?
Yeah, she was doing that.
And Holden and Miller are going to the bridge to basically find what they can there. And that's when we get a lot of info dump on essentially what happened before, during, and after the prologue. We get to see the details of how Julie got locked into the locker for 8 days, how the outbreak seemingly kind of happened to everybody on the ship, and they find this safe, which Holden can only assume has the data and possibly samples of the Phoebe bug, and Naomi finds the long distance communication pings. I don't remember the terms they use for it because I'm drawing a blank right now. That basically the communication arrays between this ship, which we later learn is called the Anubis, and something else, something moving, that is essentially their home base. So they have all this information. Holden wants to open the safe. They can't open the safe, and they feel like the quote-unquote keys to the safe are wherever it is that the Anubis is broadcasting to. So their next plan of attack is, okay, let's put this safe on let's just take it out of the ship, put it on the Roci, and figure out what our next move is, because we need to address this But their options are not quite favorable because they could take it to Mars and probably be killed, take it to the OPA and probably be killed, or sit on it and just kind of, I don't know, do nothing.
I should also point out that at this point, Earth and Mars have at least gone to some level of war, where the Martian and Earth ships have started shooting at each other.
Oh yeah,
as a result of Holden's last broadcast.
Did we talk about that in the last one about Holden deciding I'm going to broadcast this third thing yet again?
I think if we didn't, we could give a brief recap of that. Well, I think or you can go ahead.
Yeah, basically Holden found information that suggests that the ships that attacked the Canterbury and the Donnager were Earth-made. So he's like, yeah, everyone deserves to know this information. And Miller's like, you're just going to create more conflict. You're going to drag more people into this war because we don't know for certain this is what it is. You're just throwing out information without context. And Holden's like, so? And he does it anyways. And lo and behold, that drags Earth into the war. And now they are having... I don't feel like it's a hot or a cold war with Mars at this point. It feels like it's somewhere in between. It's like a warm war where they're attacking Mars a little bit. Like they completely decimated Deimos, the moon. And they're now essentially holding up a blockade around Mars. And Mars is out in the belt dealing with the Belters. And so now that's just kind of like a, well, now what kind of thing? So now the Earth has entered the fray because they got, I guess, a knee-jerk reaction to this, and instead of trying to talk to Mars about it, decided we're just going to amass our navy, and I guess we're in this now.
Yeah, I think it was just like a preemptive strike because I guess they were like, well, Mars is probably just going to turn around and attack us, so if we hit them first, they won't be able to get us. But yeah, it's definitely. I think you're correctly pointing out that it is not at this point like an all-out war, as far as we know. Both at this point and the point we would later get to, when we stopped, there had been no like attacks on any like Martian, like the planet of Mars, but there definitely was like a shootout between the fleets, and that Earth has currently got Mars under like a little bit of a blockade.
Yeah, which something we learn from Holden and Miller's conversation about this after the fact is, and this is news to Miller because Miller lacks the perspective of someone from the inner planets. That when Holden was in the Navy, in the United Nations Navy, they had contingency plans and training operations about if they needed to ever go to war against Mars. And how the only way they could win was if they essentially, struck first or something?
Preemptive strike.
Yeah, if they struck first and essentially did not allow them to use their superior artillery on Earth, essentially, I guess, glass Mars before Mars can use superior firepower to outmaneuver and just destroy the Earth first. And Miller's just like, wait, interplanetary people hate each other? That's a little strange. And Holden's like, is it really though? I mean, this has been a thing since forever. And Miller's like, well, when you're out in the belt, I guess you don't really think about that. And it's like, yeah, you don't, because you and I don't think about the interpersonal socio prejudices or differences between European countries because we're not in Europe. It's just one of those things where it's about your perspective. And it's, we can sit here and assume one thing or another, but the fact of the matter is, unless we immerse ourselves in the know, or like take ourselves into that culture, we're not going to know the nuances of them on a more macro scale. So this is Miller's just kind of things aren't exactly what you think they are either, bud, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting to see at various moments how both of them have these moments of rather shocking naivete,
Mm-hmm.
like things like that, like you were saying, it's like how Miller's shock at there being sort of like a rivalry and sort of mild enmity, although it's escalated at this point between Earth and Mars, is a little bit surprising to me, as the reader. But because they maybe it's because we spent so much time with Holden, who makes it more clear, given his perspective as an Earther, that there's like a little bit of a tension there. So it was a little bit surprising, especially given that Miller, he often comes off as being more, I guess, more aware of things around him, because as we mentioned before, his increasing, he's at this point he's basically begging him, please stop broadcasting. You keep making things worse every time you step to the mic. So why don't we just relax for a little bit? So and he seems, so in those moments he seems to be a little bit aware of the political situation in the galaxy and in those sort of relations between the disparate groups. But for him not to be aware of that, it was a little surprising to me.
Yeah, it's and you have the moment where Holden is essentially, he's doing the same thing that that Miller kind of does later, with his trying to justify his actions a little bit, and he's like, well, I didn't cause this war to happen, and this is where the whole he talks about the contingency that Earth had for fighting Mars, and he's like, well, this has all been in place. I didn't tell them to think this way and start this war. They were just looking for an excuse to start this war, and I didn't cause this. And Miller's like, you know what, this powder keg might have already existed, but you threw the match into it. So yeah, you did kind of cause this, and it is the truth. This is very much Holden's war, whether he wants to admit it or not, and whether or not you want to see it as such. Which, granted, to be fair, Holden very much is a pawn of Protogen at this point, at least in so much as the war between Mars and the Belt. Yeah, I imagine they weren't expecting there to be... No, actually, no. They were. There's no way they weren't expecting there to be survivors from the Canterbury, because remember, when Holden's just like, hey, you just killed all these people, I'm sending you all of their information, and the ship's just like, neat, cool, bye, and just left them behind. They wanted survivors, because they wanted Holden to do exactly what he did. They wanted the Canterbury and the Scopuli to go live, and for them to find the Martian battery. Clearly, they left the Martian battery there on the Scopuli, so they wanted Holden to do exactly what he did. So he was a pawn of Protogen in getting this war started. So, yeah, this is Holden's war, but you can kind of give him a little bit of a pass for the Donager... not the Donager. The Canterbury and the Scopuli and the initiation of the war between the Belters and Mars, because he was very much set up to be that person, and he fell right into it, hook, line, and sinker. But when you get with the destruction of the Donager and him sending out the information with the Earth ships and all this other stuff that's kind of really just snowballed the situation into something that is now all three major factions of this area warring against each other. Earth has killed hundreds or thousands of Martians, and Mars has attacked and killed Earthers now too. There's a lot of casualties on all three sides of this war, and you look at it and you're like, yeah, there's a very good chance this wouldn't have happened if Holden would have kept his mouth shut and let, not so much with the Canterbury and the Scopuli, but with everything else, and just kind of let things get figured out first by, let's be real, smarter people than him. Then a lot of this could have been saved. And yeah, Protogen's just sitting back happy, being like, cool, nobody gives a shit about Aero Station anymore because they're thinking about Earth and Mars now. This is perfect. So, I mean, who's really in control here at this point? Is it Holden or is it Protogen?
I think, I think you raised some good points there. I think right now they're very aptly exploiting Holden's maybe
his righteousness.
Righteousness is one way to put it.
That's the way the characters put it.
I'm not sure I fully agree with them, but I think it's his dogmatic view about the nature of information and information sharing. I think that's really what the argument between Miller and Holden is when they are on the on the Anubis, and they're like and there's Miller who's saying, like, we need to control the information. We don't know everything yet. We need to figure things out before we share it. And Holden is like saying that's the same ethos that they have. Who? Protogen. You may be on different sides, but you're playing the same game. If everyone just said what they knew, none of this would have happened. If the first lab tech on Phoebe who saw something weird had gotten in on his system and said, "Hey everyone, look, this is weird," none of this would have happened. And so I think that's his view, is like this very
naive,
I guess this,
for one.
Yeah, it's a very naive kind of worldview. It's a view that is like, and look, I think there's a lot to be said for the free exchange of information. I think that it's a good thing, but you kind of get back to kind of similar to like the certain court cases in American history that have been on the rule of rulings on freedom of speech. It's like you may have a right to express your speech in a lot of ways, but there's also it needs to be balanced by like a sort of public interest perspective. So not to say you can't yell fire in a crowded theater kind of thing, which Holden would probably say that that's what he's doing. But in the opposite, there is a fire and he is trying to let people know, and maybe that is true to a certain extent. But his actions and his I guess not his uncontextualized free release of information is just causing it's more panic than like allowing for like an orderly or like reasoned or measured response to any of these events that are occurring that he's kind of stumbling through.
Yeah, exactly.
And Protogen is just basically benefiting entirely from his sort of dogmatic view about the exchange of information.
Yeah, they were given the perfect person to be a complete and total distractionary tactic. And Miller says it perfectly himself when he talks about the case he worked, where it was some little girl was murdered, and for the first 18 hours, everybody was like, it's absolutely her drunk, gambling father that did it. It was 100% him. But then they got a tip in hour 19 that he had debts to a crime syndicate, and that crime syndicate is what killed her. And he tells Holden, if we'd have been releasing this information as we got it like you have been doing, that father would not have survived the 18 hours, let alone to the 19th when we would have gotten the tip that essentially saved his life. So you're just throwing this information out without context, and it's causing issues. And he really does need to stop. And he does stop, for the record. He does not send out the information they found from the Anubis. But this has become a problem since the beginning of the book.
Yeah. And not to sound entirely unsympathetic to Holden, I think his heart may be in the right place, because you think about a lot of the great journalistic findings of like the 20th century. One could argue about whether there has been any great journalism in the 21st century, but certainly in the 20th century. The uncovering of like the My Lai massacres, the work that was done to expose like the Watergate break-ins, the Pentagon Papers, those kind of things where there was a relatively there was the disclosure of information that those in power they probably did consider it to a certain extent destabilizing, but it was kind of unlike, I guess, in the Holden's case, it was done in a kind of measured way that sort of balanced public interest with the I guess the release of the information, if that makes sense.
Yeah, They were working with a much more complete deck of cards than Holden was.
Yeah. But yeah, that's so they're on the bridge of the Anubis, and they're kind of talking about that. Then they kind of disagree. As they're kind of leaving, this is after Holden had kind of had his another ill-advised exchange, or I guess ill-advised sharing of data. He told Naomi of his feelings for her, and that kind of ended in a very awkward way. And so he's basically this whole section that we read. He's kind of having to deal with that. He's having to deal with like these sort of second guessing, like, he's seeing her interact with other people. Like here, he's seeing her interacting with Alex, and he's like, "Are they a thing now?" It's Let me see if I can find it again. Yeah, Naomi sat down next to Alex and began a quiet conversation with him about something she'd seen on the op screen. Holden split his time between watching her and watching the lasagna. She laughed at something Alex said, and unconsciously twisted one finger into her hair. Holden felt his belly tighten a notch. So he's just, he's very, that's the kind of the state of his relationship with her is right now. He feels like this sort of, maybe entitlement is not the right word, but he feels like
it's jealousy.
He needs to be, jealousy is a big, I think probably the better word, but like he feels like he's the one that should be with Naomi.
She should be twisting her finger in her hair over something I said.
Exactly. And so he's kind of talking, or he's kind of like very hyper aware of her interactions with other people for that reason. Let's see, there's that meal where they sit down to eat the lasagna. That's some interesting character stuff too, where we see like it's a good way that the authors created a scenario wherein the different characters from their different backgrounds can kind of share their perspectives on what's going on.
Yeah.
Like you see Miller, who has a very extra planetary view, and then Holden his Earther view. Alex and Amos is kind of like a wild card because he is born on Earth, but he's kind of spent most of his life, in the belt. Naomi also a pretty belt heavy perspective, and Alex being really the only, I guess, Martian representative, so to say. Although he's not like super dogmatic about I feel like they kind of dropped the ball is a little harsh, but it feels like Alex got really de-emphasized after after the Donager,
Yeah, he
like,
did.
It feels like he's not nearly as central to the plot as I guess I would have figured, as like being the guy from Mars. So anyway, the meal is is relatively pleasant. They're getting along, sharing their perspective. It gets a little bit not too heated. I don't know. There is a kind of an interesting conversation Holden has with Miller about one thing that we haven't mentioned that I think has been kind of hanging like a Chekhov's gun of sorts, was this creation by apparently the Mormons still exist in the future, and they're building this big ship to sort of the idea at Tycho Station with the anticipation that they're going to fly to some planet in the distance and kind of create their own society out there. There's kind of, I think Holden here and Miller have a little bit of a conversation where they're talking about it, and they're saying, let's see, they're talking about it's their different opinions once again, where Holden is saying like Holden kind of views it as something that's positive. He describes it as something that will give us the stars, and Miller describes it as or a lonely death on a long trip to nowhere. And then Holden says, some species version of the Great Galactic Adventure is shooting virus-filled bullets at their neighbors. I think ours is pretty noble by comparison. Which, I don't know, it kind of struck me a little bit like, well, I don't know. I mean, it's a little bit, and I hate to keep bashing Holden as naive, but it's like, if you look at the history of colonization in our, in our history, like there is a certain element, maybe that they were, I'll put it this way. There was like an early sort of germ warfare component that was part of like colonization, of the Americas by the European powers, So it's just kind of like, I mean, is it more? I guess maybe, but like I think it's a little bit it's just a little. I thought that was kind of an interesting perspective that showed that there was kind of a little bit missing from his calculus there. Oh, okay. So they're back on Tycho Station, as I mentioned, and they do talk to Fred, and they're saying that this is another time when I was a little bit surprised, where they're saying, okay, so they come into a meeting with Fred, and they see him. He looks physically older than the last time they seen each other in a couple weeks. So it's pretty clear that things have deteriorated out in the belt, and they're a little bit or he's a little bit worse for the wear. He seems to be almost disbelieving in like what Naomi was able to determine about the Phoebe bug, which he was saying, or she was saying, they were using networked nanobugs for increased processing power. So meaning that the idea was to make it spread as much as possible to just collect more data. Because and this is something that they've kind of started figuring out, is that whatever this virus is, it breaks organic matter down, and then it's trying to reprocess it into something else. And one thing that was a little bit surprising to me here was that Fred was like, that only makes sense to a psychopath. No one sane could do that, no matter what they thought they could get out of it. It's just like, really? Are you serious? Like you were in like a lot of military actions here. You were like the butcher of Anderson Station, and you're going to sit there and tell me that you're shocked that people could, or that someone could theoretically act with callous disregard of consequences. I mean, that was a little bit surprising. But Miller, he kind of rejoins him with like, well, humans have been engaged in like genocide. He's like, don't kid yourself. Genocide's old school. Second, the facts aren't in question. Protogen infected Aero Station with a lethal alien disease, and they've recorded the results. The why doesn't matter. We just need to stop them. So, and it's at that point that Holden decides, like, okay, and also, we've been able to figure out where Thoth Station is, and they kind of have a little bit of a back and forth, where Holden sells Fred on the idea of like, well, we just need to do a commando raid of the station.
Do you mean Miller?
And I think it was Holden, right?
Miller was the one that was saying, I have the Miller's the one that's talking the whole time, because he's the one that's saying, I have the information you need. You need to make sure that you get your little OPA grunts ready to go. And then that's when Naomi and Holden are like, you do know who you're talking to, right? And he's just like, what? And they're like, Fred Johnson. He's like, okay. And they're like, the butcher of Anderson Station. And he's like, oh.
Yeah, okay. I've opened I flipped to that page. Yeah, you're right. I just saw the bit where Holden was talking about how he wants to keep a hold of the safe and the contents of the safe.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, okay. Yeah, that was actually kind of funny, that moment where Miller was like, he was astonished that he didn't know, and then he was like, where did it go?
He's like, I seriously thought you knew it was him.
Yeah, that's what I was like. That was kind of funny. That was just like they were like, are you they were pretty shocked by, because Miller was talking to Fred with a lot of very frank in a very frank tone, and I remember at one point is it said I took a note here of Miller looking at Frank like a bug, which I was like, that is, I thought that was a very weird a very weird choice, but I guess they really realized. I guess he just really didn't realize who he was talking to there. That was a very strange moment, but it was written in a very amusing way there to kind of have a humorous payoff.
Yeah, it was a fun little scene. So the plan now at this point is the OPA, or Fred's going to amass the ground forces needed to take over Thoth Station. The Rocinante is going to essentially lead the charge, and Miller is going to stay with what was the ship name? Oh man, the OPA ship.
The Molinari.
Yeah, the Molinari. Yeah, Miller's going to be on the OPA ship, the Molinari, that are going to come in afterwards, after the Rocinante takes out essentially the exterior defenses of Thoth Station, and then they're going to have the boarding crew, which Miller's a part of, and they're going to take the station over. So it goes somewhat to plan. The Rocinante, they realize, they get info from Fred that there are heat signatures that are similar to the stealth ship that took out the Canterbury. So they're preparing for that, and when they get to Thoth Station, in a really cool little ingenious plan where they essentially disguise themselves as a hunk of metal that accidentally got projectiled out of the OPA ship and is just hurtling through space. But then at the last second, once they get in range, they kick everything back on, rocket in, and start the fight. That was a fun little plan. I thought that was a nice little ingenious way of having like some sort of element of surprise on their side. But they learned that ship is actually two fighters that are just hunkered close together to I guess throw it off, which is exactly what it did. So now they're having to deal with two fighter ships and the defenses of the station. They take out the comms array of the station, or whatever it was, the thing that controlled the defense ships, and then have to systematically take out the two fighters, but they sustain significant damage to the Roci in that time, and they are able to take them both out, but the ship has essentially been hobbled at this point, so they have to limp back into a docking port on Thoth Station, while Miller and the ground crew go in and somewhat easily take over Thoth Station. Miller notices that the mercenaries, the Protean mercenaries, are using riot-suppressing ammo, which is, as far as I can tell, essentially glue guns. Just shooting them with just big old things of white goo that's supposed to suppress them. Doesn't really work. And so they take over the station, and they meet Mr. Dresden, the vice president of bioengineering Protogen divisions. I don't remember the exact title. And that's where everybody meets back up after the battle.
Yeah, so they land. They landed this into or the Rocinante crew. They land in the hangar, and they're getting debriefed by one of the OPA officers on the ground, and they escort them in to the office with Dresden. And Dresden is portrayed as like being very I guess arch, kind of like he's like very like, you are all but pawns in my master plan. You don't even realize how grand my design. You know, that kind of guy.
Yeah, if you played BioShock, he gives me like some Andrew Ryan kind of vibes.
He gave me like anime vibes. Like he's like that kind of like very arch villain. I found him quite tiresome, to be honest. It was just because it's this sort of like affected heightened mind and sort of like grandiloquent bearing that was just kind of like, okay, dude, cool, whatever.
Yeah,
You know.
he's a shitty character, but not because of bad writing, but because he's a shitty person.
So there's like an allusion to Jesus being tempted in the desert by the devil, like where he's there. Basically, Dresden's like, look, you don't realize what we're doing here. You don't realize what you've just walked into. So you know what? Here, just name your price, and we'll send you on your way. Whatever you want: guns, money, medicine, all of the above, whatever. We'll just cut the check, and you can just get out of here, and we'll get back to work. And so that's when there's the allusion I think Fred Johnson makes to the devil, offering Jesus all the kingdoms of the earth if he would just bow down to him. And then he's like, I'm afraid I don't get the reference, you know, just to really to dig into like this idea of like he's like a very like amoral sort of character. He himself is very evil and all that. So that's when the Rocinante crew comes up, and then they're kind of really, the conversation doesn't go too far. Like there's like a little bit more that they're able to drag out of him.
Yeah.
But basically, he's pretty tight-lipped. He's like, our grand designs cannot be comprehended by such fools as you. Now please leave the station, and you know, blah blah blah.
Dresden is the internet meme of a Rick and Morty fan.
He really is. It's like he's all of the things he's saying. It's just like this very affected, like, I am so smart tone. So much so that I almost don't blame Miller for what he does.
Yeah.
He basically just, Miller's like, okay, this is getting nowhere. He's just talking in circles at this point. So Miller, Dresden didn't even see it coming. Even as Miller raised his pistol, the man's eyes didn't register a threat. All he saw was Miller with an object in his hand that happened to be a gun. A dog would have known to be scared, but not Dresden.
And then Miller shot him like 8 times.
Which, you know, I gotta say, I think I agree largely with Holden's idea that it probably would be better from a moral standpoint and from an intelligence standpoint to bring him in for like questioning or for that kind of thing. But you know, Miller did what he did, and so that this is what causes the rupture that we alluded to earlier between Miller and Holden. It's Holden is very affronted by this action. He seems very shocked that Miller killed Dresden in such a way that was kind of surprising, I guess. It's just like, really? I mean, maybe it's just like they don't really show the morality as being like particularly different in this world. Like there's, you know, you get things like Star Trek where you see like humanity has changed in some ways, like they're more enlightened and have more enlightened views. But these humans seem a lot more similar to humans from our time, in so much that their values are very legible as being really contemporary to now certainly, but definitely to like the 2010s, you know, when this was published. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, after this, there's kind of a Holden basically says to him, you know, you can't come back with me. Find another way back. Which, you know, I find as a little bit, I was a little bit shocked by, but it was like, okay, well, he was able to catch a ride. You know, Fred was able to give him a ride. Fred, by the way, at this point does not seem particularly particularly phased one way or the other, or bothered one way or another about the actions. He seems to be just kind of like, okay, guys, stop. We have a job to do. Stop bickering. We need to get about what we need to do. So Miller kind of hangs back, and he's helping the OPA take prisoners, and he's helping them, like teaching them how to process that many people. He's talking about like how green they seem, because they're, in a lot of cases, they're just like early 20s, late teens guys, for the most part. And so they don't really know anything about how to pat somebody down, how to check for like a knife or something like that, or like a firearm. And so they head back to Thoth Station, and Miller, we pick up with Miller, and he's kind of going, he's kind of he's checking the news, and he's not really seeing a lot happening, like on the news. He was expecting there to be like a big news story coming out about Earth Corporation's outpost destroyed by extremist Belter political faction. He was expecting it to become like the next domino to fall in the ongoing emergent galactic war. And so when he realizes days have passed and nothing's happened, he's a little bit surprised by that. And so he's just kind of like wandering through, because he doesn't really know what to do with his life at this point. He gets a little bit of money from the OPA for joining them on that mission, and he's going to the bar, and he runs into a technician who was there during the battle of the Thoth Station. They get to chatting a little bit, and he shows Miller some footage of like what they saw. He was looking at the protomolecule in action. He was seeing Juliet Andromeda Mao's corpse writ large. For a moment, his imagined Julie flickered beside him. If you ever wonder if you did the right thing shooting that guy, look at that. Miller opened a feed, a long corridor wide enough for 20 people to walk abreast. The floor was wet and undulating like the surface of a canal. Something small rolled awkwardly through the mush. When Miller zoomed in, it was a human torso. Ribcage, spine, trailing lengths of what used to be intestines were now the long black threads of the protomolecule, pushing itself along on the stump of an arm. There was no head. The feed output bar showed there was no sound, and Miller undid the mute. The high, mindless piping reminded him of mentally ill children singing to themselves. It's all like that, the kid said. The whole station's crawling with that. Then they kind of get into what it's doing, and he talks about how it's amalgamating itself in some way. And I don't know, that was pretty disturbing, like this idea of like this like torso like crawling through this flesh soup, making this high pitched like squealing noise, which is like just like an astonishingly horrific image. And it's kind of like you don't really it kind of reminds me like of like Unit 431, in the Japanese Imperial Army. It reminds me of some of the Nazi experiments, that were undertaken during the Holocaust. Just like this very like, it was done ostensibly in terms of like scientific research, but in reality, it's just such a hideous grotesquerie that you're just like, what on earth are you? There is no one reasonable or moral, or you cannot condone this under any auspices, is what I'm trying to say. So it's just, when you think about things like that, it's just like, wow, that's really, and also the fact that was it 1.5 million people died on Aero Station?
Yeah, just about.
You really begin to see like this is very and the way it was just carried out with such like callousness. You know, it there definitely reminds me of that essay about the banality of evil, that kind of thing. You know. But yeah, that was that. So anyway, the people of the OPA largely back Miller's decision to kill Dresden right then and there. And I guess, but from there we kind of see where for the first time we see that Miller is kind of he's found not necessarily adulation, but like acceptance, like his actions on Thoth Station, both during the raid and afterwards with Dresden. It seems like he's finally found a group of people that think positively, that accept him. And we can kind of contrast that with like his earlier part of his story, where he was kind of viewed as like a failure, the joke, the screw up. Mm-hmm. But while he's there at the bar, he also runs into Naomi and Amos, and who he walks up to, and he's trying to talk to them, and they're very cold with him. Or Naomi's pretty cold, but she's not like overtly stating the obvious. So he's trying to buy them a drink, and they're like, yeah, okay, I guess, just one. And so eventually she leaves, and because she's just looking for any excuse to get out of there. And but Amos is not really. He's making it a little more transparent that he's not really he's kind of persona non grata. Miller is kind of persona non grata. And so as she kind of leaves, he kind of hangs back. He basically lays it out to him, and he's like, look, the captain doesn't want you around, and whatever he says goes. He's like, Naomi's a good person, but she's not like us, and for that and the captain's not like us. Amos is referring to him and Miller. He's saying that we're kind of like the outsiders, the people that are not sort of bound by the typical mores of human interaction. And Miller is a little bit taken aback by that. He's like, because I killed someone who needed it. And then Amos is like, because you've got a habit of that. Captain's not like that. Killing people without talking it over first makes him jumpy. You did a lot of it on Eros, but the Thoth Station wasn't Eros. The next place we go won't be Eros either. Holden doesn't want you around. And then he's kind of like, so that's kind of the thing, is like he's kind of laying it out there to Miller that he's just like, well, we don't really, you're no longer a part of the crew. You can't sit with us anymore, at lunch. That kind of thing. And it's not something that Miller hasn't considered himself. He's talked, I think particularly when we were on the Aero Station bit, he even mentions to himself, he's like, wow, I've killed so many people today. And he's like, in each of those moments, I could justify it to myself. But, if it was talking to my partner, I would be worried that they'd gone off the deep end, that kind of thing.
I think he says that he killed more people on Aero Station than he had in the entirety of his career on Ceres. I could be wrong. I feel like I remember reading him saying that he had killed more people that day than he had prior.
That might be. I might have just forgotten that. I just know that he had like a previous incident that he remembered, like during his like being a rookie, where he killed someone and was pretty surprisingly like unaffected by it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I missed, or I forgot the other part.
I think that does blend really well into his statements about post-human and how it was normally used for like technology that was invented that was a like post-human technological leap. Something like one of the examples is literally a sex robot, and he thinks it's more so. he uses the term post-human to describe himself, or just generally people that have now kind of superseded the idea of what it is to be human. People like him, people like Dresden, to where it's like we've lost what emotional attachment to humanity we have now, outside of personal survival instinct.
And that's something that Dresden also kind of talks about, where he was when he was doing his "I am so evil" monologue, he mentions like modifying the engineers to create, to work on this project, and they're like, how could anybody work on that? And he was like, we have altered them to remove their empathy and all this stuff. But again, as I was saying at the time, he's like, and what Miller also mentioned too in his earlier conversation with Fred, where he was trying to bargain to get the attack to go, is like, it's like, I mean, humans have been doing this certainly for all of recorded history. There are people that just for one reason or another are just, and I don't feel fully right to use this as a descriptor in the case of like Miller, and maybe it's just imprecise, but it's just like this sort of like sociopathy, or at least this sort of like minimization of the importance of like the deaths of others, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like, it was kind of like this thing where it's like, I don't know that it's necessarily post-human. I think it's just this question, about like what, about these things about the nature of force, and about the questions about like violence, and like how we treat other people. I think this is something that humanity has always grappled with.
I figured out Dresden, by the way.
Oh, what's the deal?
He's a Resident Evil villain.
he is basically just Excella or Wesker. He's basically just like, yes, using our evil virus, we will transcend humanity, and we will create a greater life form. That kind of.
That is literally Wesker's plan in Resident Evil 5.
So yeah, that's kind of where we're at, folks. It's just like a very I kind of maybe glazed over it a little too much, because it was just because of how preposterous it was. But that's really what we're talking about, is like they literally thought, we can maybe reverse engineer this virus into something that will create superhumans, which again is just a wholly preposterous notion that really doesn't deserve really even a modicum of consideration. But that's just kind of what we're dealing with.
Yeah, which something I don't think we touched on earlier when we were talking about Dresden's little monologue is the protomolecule is extraterrestrial. He posits that 2 billion years ago, aliens sent this biological nuke to the Earth, but Saturn got in the way, and that's why they only were like finding it recently on Phoebe. And so his whole plan is, ostensibly, once we get this evolutionary jumpstart going and we start traveling to the stars outside of the solar system where these aliens live, and it's been 2 billion years, so God knows where they're at now after 2 billion more years of evolution, we need to be ready for them. And one of the things that I can't remember if it's Miller, Holden, or Fred in that conversation that says, why, like, or we could just not go to the stars. But then he's just like, well, yeah, but we should, basically. And it's just this whole thing is like, we're going to be competing with gods, so we need to be ready to essentially make a god bleed. And
it's just so preposterous. It's like that, but you don't understand. That was 2 billion years ago.
Yeah,
that asteroid was sent. So like, who's to say they even exist anymore? Who's to say they didn't wipe themselves out, or were wiped out by something else? Or that their motives are the same, but their societies are the same. He's buying into this, and this is a very late 20th through like 21st century worldview is like this idea of progress as being linear. Who's to say their civilization hasn't collapsed, into like a basically like a Bronze Age civilization? That like there is no data to support what he's talking about, and that's why I'm saying like his plan deserves absolutely no consideration because it's just total nonsense. It's just extrapolation, like extreme extrapolation from basically no data points.
Yeah, I had to Google this because I didn't know the exact number. The Earth is approximately 4.5 billion years old. So, 2 billion years ago. There's that. I might butcher this thing, but if the timeline of the Earth was a standard clock, humanity's existence would be, I think it's something along the lines of 30 seconds on that clock. And
wow.
Humanity has existed for a long time. Let me just Google that real quick.
Well, I would even say, the virus thing, it predates certainly all like mammalian life. It probably predates almost all vertebrate life as well, I would imagine.
Yeah, so humanity is approximately, this is just a quick Google search. What it's telling me, 1.5 to 2 million years old, give or take. This is just a quick Google search. I could be off here. Google is not a scientist.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, even if it's double that or 10 times that, that's that is nothing when you compare it to the scope of billions of years. So it's just like that's what I'm saying. It's just like it just to even think that the those aliens that sent the asteroid containing the virus could have even conceived of how human life or life itself was going to develop on Earth is just a laughable notion. It's just so it just none of that stuff to me makes sense. But it does make for like a fair, and I'm glad we went back and we kind of talked about it a little bit more. I think I might have hand waved it a little bit too much because of how I felt about it, but I think that just kind of goes to show you like what kind of villains that we're dealing with here. And also, I'm glad you mentioned it again because that means I have been once again vindicated as a book knower. I don't know if you remember, but I did mention that this threat may be somewhat extraterrestrial in nature.
Yeah, and I did tell you that I had an idea that it was a third party that was pulling the strings here, which I was right. Protogen is the third party pulling the strings here, but I also told you that your idea does not need to conflict with my idea, so we were both right.
I know, and that's why you listen, because we are the book knowers.
Yeah.
We know things.
Maybe you a little more than me.
I don't know. I think it's when it comes to plot, you've probably got me beat.
I don't know. I'm definitely not keeping score. But I do want to throw out a harebrained theory while I'm thinking about it. So,
sure.
Dresden was talking about when they go to the stars, when they leave the solar system, when they pull a Mass Effect Andromeda, which totally stole from this book, by the way. It may not have actually stolen from it. It's not necessarily a novel concept to leave the solar system, but I do find it very funny, the similarities between Mass Effect Andromeda and the storyline of the Nauvoo ship, the Mormon ship on Tycho. I'm reading that and I'm like, this book came out before Mass Effect Andromeda, and Andromeda did the exact same thing. That's funny. Anyways, so he's talking about this evolutionary expansion that can help them essentially ascend to godhood when they leave the solar system and explore other systems that have alien life on it. What is the Nauvoo trying to do at this point? It's trying to leave the solar system and try and find another place for humanity to live. So, what if there's a safe somewhere that Holden knows about that has samples of the Phoebe bug, this protomolecule. It's not the only, if there is a sample of it in that safe, it's not the only place where there are samples. There are probably samples, we don't know this for certain, but there might be samples in Thoth Station. There is a mass of samples on Arrow Station. This shit is freely available to someone who has the means to get to it and know where it's at. So what if when the Nauvoo is ready to go and the Mormon community is getting on it, they're getting ready to go on their big missionary trip to new stars, a little bit of the Phoebe bug finds its way onto the ship, and we have that multi-generational time span where it can coagulate.
Yeah, I could gesture into some sort of like not that next stage that he was talking about. That's a really interesting idea.
Get that proto-molecule male to female copulation.
But that's probably not too far off, because that's kind of what I was saying. They keep mentioning the Nauvoo over and over again. And, at first I was kind of like, yeah, okay, it's interesting, a little bit of flavor text, whatever.
The Mormons, am I right?
Trying to get to the next plot point with Miller. But they've mentioned it so many times now. It's kind of like, and now that you mentioned that the scope of their mission is going to take, let's just say conservatively, hundreds of years, probably maybe even thousands of years. But when you take that into consideration, it's just like, what, that may be what they're doing, is that they're going to be processing the people that are on board the ship into creating these sort of like meta-human, post-human thing.
Yeah. I also feel like I'm starting to have a growing mistrust of Fred at this point. I don't know if it's founded, but I just little pieces here and there that have happened since being introduced to him. It's starting to make me feel like there is some sort of ulterior thing we don't know about yet that is going to essentially be the heel turn in the final act coming up. Mm-hmm.
What are you gathering? I'm still relatively pro Fred, but I might have missed something.
Just his kind of he's a little. I feel like he was a little too blasé about Thoth Station, a little too emotionless about it, especially Miller's actions, and there's just some of his reactions, and we get little pieces of, like, earlier in the book when Holden says something and is like, "Oh, Fred did not laugh as he expected," and there's times where
to be fair, he was being extremely cringe.
Sure.
When he
But there are like these minor ticks that you're seeing in Fred that, at least to me, it just seems like it could be. It could not be, but it could be small little subtle things that this person is having this exterior character that he's putting out as a front that's hiding some sort of more inner, not necessarily evil, but ambitious side that might, what if he agrees with Dresden? What if because Miller was even saying, he when he was talking to Holden, he was saying, it's not that I was agreeing with him, but just maybe, and that's why I shot him. What if that just maybe was a little stronger in Fred? And what does Fred have access to? The Nauvoo, the Nauvoo.
That, or it's possible that he might, represent. Well, no, I was going to speculate that it is theoretically possible that he might represent some other group that already kind of knows more about this and was trying to gather it for his purpose or the purposes of people that he's aligned with. But I don't know. They didn't seem to, at least Dresden didn't seem to portray any sort of prior knowledge of Fred beyond the fact that who he was, a relatively famous military figure.
I'm not trying to imply that they were working together at that point. I'm saying that what if what he was saying to them got through to Fred, and Fred was like, he's not wrong.
No, I know what you mean. I was that was a failed postulation. I guess on my part to see if like to think about was there any kind of prior maybe meeting, but I think there's something to be said for what you're saying though is like this idea that he may have and maybe it did resonate with him, this idea of like this sort of like we need to be ready for what's out there, what's next. Maybe he doesn't necessarily view it in the terms that Dresden does. Like we need to watch out for like whatever sent that asteroid 2 billion years ago. But maybe he understands from his perspective as like a belt, a belt aligned figure that there needs to be some sort of like move to create like to make the Belters more self-sufficient,
Yeah.
And what does that mean? How do we get there? Maybe a seed was planted there that he's like, well, maybe he's right. Maybe we do need to become some sort of like meta-humans.
He was right, but not in the way that he thought he was.
Yeah, exactly. It's just kind of like, and that's kind of like where the book has been. Like it's like this idea of like, are Belters and humans the same? Are they compatible? All the differences between them. Maybe that's kind of where this is all going.
Yeah, which I could be very wrong. This, like I said, this was a harebrained theory. I also thought that Zappano and Johnny Truant might be the same person, and they very clearly weren't. So I don't exactly necessarily have the best track record of crazy theories. So it's just it's as I said in House of Leaves, it is a fun kind of mental exercise to kind of throw out these crazy ideas just as a what if, to see if your understanding or interpretation of the story is at least somewhat on track. I don't know, it's fun. Even if I'm wrong, it's still fun to think about.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think
we need a fourth quarter villain, though, I will say.
I think that might be, and it's something that I kind of mentioned back in before we had too much of Fred. It was the Dawes. There was something about him that I didn't quite trust.
Yeah, I wonder if he's going to come back. He seemed too important to just leave.
And he was played by
Jared Harris in the show.
It's like that's a big actor to. Unfortunately, we probably shouldn't do stuff like that, but to use that as like a meta-textual sort of analysis. But, that is kind of something that I've thought about is like, well, when is Dawes going to come back? Because Jared Harris is a pretty big actor to just bring in and then just have him in there for like what would have been the equivalent of like 2 episodes,
Godzilla 2014 used Bryan Cranston for all of 15 minutes and used him all over the marketing. It's not unheard of. But it's still kind of dumb.
That's fair.
But to round out the story, Holden and Naomi gonna fuck, and now we're caught up.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Holden was a little bit sad because of the sort of like we mentioned at the top. There was like a little bit of a meeting between Holden and Miller. And there it was not. It didn't really go. It could have gone worse, but it could have gone better because they didn't really get too deep into like what's separating them as people. Like they kind of like allude to it a little bit, but they don't ever. There is no catharsis. There is no like ultimate like resolution there. It's just kind of like Miller's just like he just kind of senses that Holden is not interested in like. He doesn't want him there, and then he just kind of is like, okay, well, I understand. I'll I'm gonna just leave, and then it just kind of leaves on this sort of like very intentionally like ambiguous and kind of unsatisfying way. And then he calls he calls Naomi. He's like, hey, you want to meet up and talk about it? I'm a little bit, he's feeling a little bit unsure of himself at that time.
She asks him to meet up, by the way.
Oh, she asks him to...
I think so. You might want to double check that, but I feel like that is an important distinction.
I think, well, I suppose, but I think that was his hope, was to meet up with her. So I guess, even if she did, I think that they were wanting to meet up. Anyway, so he goes and he talks to Naomi, and he seems like he's like having this sort of like realization. It's finally dawning on him that he has some culpability in the creation of this sort of like galactic war, and he's starting to feel bad about it. He's just like, let me grab the book real quick. I need a win, Naomi, he continued. I need to do something that makes a difference. Fate or karma or God or whatever dropped me in the middle of this thing, and I need to know I'm making a difference. Which, I mean, I think we can safely say that he has been making a difference, although not, this is a very monkey paw, kind of situation where he is making a difference. It's just making things worse.
It's costing a lot at the same time.
But yeah, anyway, so she asks him, she says, you're cute when you're being noble, but you need to stare off into the distance more. So she's kind of like, she starts to get a little flirty with him, and then asks, want to come home with me? And then he's like, yeah. And that's basically where we end.
Yeah.
But jokes aside, I think that's kind of like the resolution, or I guess, we have a little bit of book left, but I think it can safely be said that's the resolution of the subplot with Naomi and Holden, is like they are now a thing.
They're at least gonna have sex together, like whether that blooms into an actual relationship or if it's just gonna be a guy and a girl getting some stress relief going, remains to be seen. But for all intents and purposes, yeah, that arc has concluded in the very predictable yet satisfying conclusion.
Yeah, but what remains to be seen is what's the deal with Holden and Miller.
Yeah, and the solar system at large.
And the solar system at large. It's like those are the open questions. I don't think that we will see the conclusion of at least the solar system question, because this, as we've stated before, this is part of a very lengthy series. So I think that's going to take at least a few books, and then maybe maybe there's like multiple arcs during the series, but there's definitely going to be. It's definitely going to take a while for that to be unraveled, but I'm hoping we can at least get some resolution to the Miller-Holden storyline.
If this is a well-written book from start to finish, which I've heard it is, and I feel like it is as far as we've read, then this book will be able to resolve its major plot while still having itself open to be a series as a whole.
Yeah, I guess we'll see. I get the sense that they're going to do a cliffhanger. But
there might be a cliffhanger in the terms of like there are unanswered questions that can be pursued into a greater series form, but I feel like there needs to be a wrap-up of the major plot this story is telling, at least in terms of the character arc that the main characters are going through, and the resolution of at least what this protomolecule is and how it's being used in the system. Whether or not it extends past this book is the question for the series, but I feel like you can still end the story of the mystery of it in a very satisfying way without essentially cutting off it being a one-off.
That's fair. Yeah, I think that's it. I think we stopped on page
we got like just under 130 pages left, I think.
Yeah, we just a little bit under. We stopped on page 442, so I think yeah, we probably can knock this out for next time.
Yep, next time will be the final episode of Leviathan Wakes. We're gonna wrap this book up.
Yep, I'm looking forward to seeing the conclusion, and looking forward to seeing you all next time. Have a good one.
Yep, see you later.